So once again, thank you all for being here. It really does give me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Simon Barry, who is the digital lead for the Environment Business Unit at CSIRO. Simon actually has recently become the digital lead. This comes from Data 61 into our business unit. So Simon's got an extensive history using digital technologies, modelling and simulation to solve significant Australian challenges. He's held significant senior roles at CSIRO over the past 17 years. Wow, I haven't realised it was that long. Including being I've been there longer, including being Science and Deputy Director of Data 61 and being the Research Director of the Analytics and Decision Sciences Program in Data 61. Before that, he was a Senior Principal Research Scientist in the Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry in Canberra, which pioneered the use of quantitative methods in complex decision-making. He's also worked at ANU, the Australian Defence Force Academy and the Australian Bureau of Stats, and I guess before that he was a student and before that he was a child. So I think I might leave it at that. I might get Simon to come up and give you an absolutely fantastic presentation on modelling and the rise of machine learning.
Okay, is the microphone fine? Everyone can hear me? No worries. So, look, I'd just like to thank thank Sue for the excellent and comprehensive introduction. Back to childhood. I was born in Brisbane actually, but that's probably a longer story. I'd like to, of course, just thank the organisers, for inviting me. I think this is a great opportunity and this is a great conference. So I'm really pleased, to be giving, the talk today. I think some of the other, plenary speakers I know from the last few days, I suppose they've reflected on, their time at MODSIM, and this is the second time I've been to MODSIM, and I think this one's been really special for me because, I think because of my role and because of COVID, I haven't actually been to a conference for 5 years, and it actually just makes me reflect on the importance, of conferences and the importance of, the humanness of coming together, and talking, and I suppose, there is an element that, as Sue pointed out, I'm getting old. It goes back for a while. But just seeing the students coming through, and seeing people that I've seen as students, in the past, as they've developed their careers and have made the vital contributions that we need to make to Australia and the world, in terms of the work we do. So, I think this is a really, this is a really good conference, and it's just really good to be. Among you all. I suppose as a sort of a segue into the talk, I think the conferences that I've been going to, probably over the last 8 or 9 years have actually been, machine learning conferences. And so, I've sort of lived, I've lived in other places, and I suppose, today I think the opportunity, to reflect, on those two things, because I think in my youth, I sort of, and that is a long time ago, I did reflect that, that I suppose the data and the analysis of data is all the same thing, and to some extent, that it all leads to the same place. Whereas I actually think, that there's actually fundamentally different paradigms are starting to come through, right? And they actually clash with our existing paradigms. And I think it's the big questions for us is to think through, what does that mean? What's the good side? What's the good part of that? And what's a part that we think maybe that's not a change that we want to see? And I suppose that's something that I'll talk about today. So I suppose, moving into the discussion, moving into the talk, I just wanted to start because I know traditionally, for plenary speakers, we discuss crocodiles fairly early in the talk. So I know from Sondos and from Dan, they've discussed crocodiles. Because look, the bad news is, because crocodiles, I suppose from Monday, they could move to different places, they could do different things. Unfortunately, the Northern Territory, a crocodile has moved to a place that people didn't want it to be. And that's actually opened up, the Chief Minister's now discussing that crocodile culls, actually, they're going to actually look at how they manage that, and that's a complicated process, and it'll need modelling, decision making, and there'll be moral and ethical issues in terms of how you actually deal with that. So that's actually a challenge for us. I think Northern Territory, there's always something interesting here. I remember the first time I came to Darwin, people always told me that the NT News always had the best headlines in Australia. And I went, that's really amazing. So what should I do? So the first day I came here, I was going down to the service station to buy breakfast or whatever I was doing, and there was the headline, and the headline was "Croc Attack Survivor Killed by Snake." You know, now that was now look, again curiously, I actually knew the person who died was actually Val Plumwood, who was she was actually famous at ANU as a philosopher around the environment. You know, and she'd been found dead, you know, very near where I've got a property or whatever. She actually died of a heart attack, but it didn't stop the NT news. So I think there's always some things to be done. But look, I think we need to, so we need to get on. So I suppose the question, so the question I've been sort of posing is what's the future of AI ML in modelling and simulation, right? How does it fit in? You know, we've seen some amazing talks, you know, at the, well, I've seen talks, and I hope you've been going to see them as well. You know, and I think the question that, you know, that I ask, and I suppose I'm coming, I suppose from a more traditional statistical sort of area, but I think the pressures in lots of places, is it inevitable that, you know, that modelling and simulation, you know, and that's in the broad sense, will become subsumed into AI, and what does that mean for us? And I suppose it's a bit more sensitive piece, you know, especially, well, you know, if I'll talk about, at least in terms of where I come from statistics, yeah, there's whole swathes of, you know, I suppose theory that we've developed over, you know, or the discipline's developed over a long time, that are effectively, I suppose people are bypassing it, right? They're generating new theory, or they're generating new approaches to things, right? And again, that sort of challenges, you know, how much of our knowledge is illusory, you know, how much of it is fashion versus, you know, what's the substance of what we do, right? What is the science that we do? And I still reflect, if I look back into my history, you know, when I saw, you know, I suppose, you know, retired people when I was a PhD student, I still remember them talking about, you know, they can now solve with a computer something that in the 60s, you know, it took 5 of us to, you know, to do, and, you know, and it's sort of, it's subsumed it. So I suppose it's always thinking around what's the timeless bits of what we do and what's the bits that move on. Look, I suppose I want to put up a few options just to I suppose tease some of the issues out, and I suppose they're not, you know, don't take them totally literally. So the first one is ML AI, is it like the spread of Christianity, you know, and that we're going to, you know, find a new way to pray, you know, and that we need to go to it. And look, my apologies for the Christian metaphor. It's more that, you know, that think of it like a prophet, you know, but in a positive sense, right? So it's neither one religion or another. But is it something that we all need to, I suppose, give ourselves to in a way, all right? And that's where this is going. Look, I suppose just to bookend the debate, you know, is it actually, is it actually the rise of the machines? And I did choose the rise of AI, you know, carefully, right? Is it actually that, is it actually that it's going to run over the top of quite a few things? And if it's going to run over the top of quite a few things, yeah, where does that leave us? I suppose, you know, is David Post the new Terminator? I don't know who the, I don't know how that will play out, but I think it's one to think of. But I suppose the one I'm asking this audience to talk about, you know, to think about and, you know, think about into lunch, is kind of, well, where are we in that? Right? What do you think's happening? So I suppose we'll go to the talk, and, you know, there's the danger that this is a slightly untimed talk, so we'll see how we roll. But I just want to talk a little bit about my journey to work out, well, how did I actually end up on this lectern? Let's talk around the big opportunities, and I want to be really clear, because, you know, AI, it's really quite amazing, the speed and the things that are happening and the claims that are being made. Like, it's an amazing point in time, but I suppose yeah, so, and that's definitely, we have to be 100% engaged with that. But I suppose there's also other things going on that I want to touch on as well. But I don't want anyone to go away, you know, I've been very careful to make sure, you know, that I don't want to be churlish towards the whole area. So I think it is how we think through that. All right, so I want to talk about a couple of the issues around, you know, synthetic data and responsible AI, which I think are coming to the worlds we live in, but, you know, how are we ready to deal with that? And then, yeah, I'll talk around where I think we are. You know, maybe that's a point where others, I suppose, can reflect where they think we are as well. Look, so I suppose, you know, how did I get here? Why am I on this? Why am I here? Why am I actually having a view about analysing data or thinking about modelling, right? So if we really go back, like in Australia, in the 1930s, right, the first sort of statisticians or biometricians, you know, and this is at the CSIRO, but the CSIRO was a big game. You know, it's 2% of the innovation system now, whereas in the past it was a huge part of the innovation system. You know, the first 3 people were women. And Helen Newton-Turner, who's the picture there was, is actually a very, extremely eminent, animal breeder, and using statistics in that, and in the Australian sheep industry, which is at the heart of Australia, right, in terms of the living off the sheep's back. So they're all women. Now, I sort of wondered why the women. I worked it out because we'll get down to the slide below. Because anything that involved a keyboard involved a woman. And back then, the machines you used to calculate things were keyboard based, and that's actually the answer as far as I can tell. Right, but let's keeping the journey. Right, so in the 1950s, that's where Australia first actually said, this new data thing, right, and it was coming out of the UK, but also out of the US. The new data thing was important, and they started to invest in there and bring quite significant figures to Australia and start to be serious about it. And that actually drove a lot of, the first computers in CSIRO. It drove, the agricultural revolution, and we're still a very strong agriculturally based area. 1964, there were the first computers at ANU, so I'm an ANU graduate. So again, that was coming in there. You can actually see in the picture there, that's an IBM computer, at ANU. And again, you can see there's a woman on the keyboard, right? Because that was how gender equity worked at that time, right? Computer science was actually part of the ANU statistics department, right, in 1972 before it actually split off. If we go into the 1970s, there was industrial. That was the first time industrial mathematics was actually seen as being important, and I think it's quite interesting that many of the echoes of those decisions, right? So here is now Australia's become an industrialised country, and you need to have a broader spectrum of interests. You need operations research, mathematical modelling, applied mathematics, computational mathematics, and then keep on doing the agricultural statistics. That's actually, the echoes of that are in this room, right? There's people who've come, through that system, some into CSIRO and then more broadly, but then just the momentum that comes with that, and that a community like this can actually generate. Right, then, in the 80s, right, there was, I suppose that's where there was just further expansion, right? It became, the universities actually became much bigger. In the 70s, CSIRO was the biggest game in town, in the data space, and that's changed. I put this here just for my CSIRO colleagues, and there's a number here, just talking around, from Hansard, the science minister, saying that we needed to revitalise our high technology manufacturing and support the emerging information and space technology industries, because that's actually quite consistent with where our current strategy is as well. So I think some good ideas never change. I suppose just really quickly into my journey, right? So I think the first one there. So in 1974, I know my father brought back. He was working at Parliament, right? So he brought back that's a TI SR10. And because at that stage they were making me learn times tables and do all sorts of things, whereas just poking the numbers in and the answers coming out was quite was quite interesting. My father bought the first TRS-80 in Canberra, right? So that's a Z80 machine. So I remember a bit of a time without computers, but I also remember computers coming. But I think if we just keep moving, right? So in 1986 there was like an Amiga 500. Right? That's actually my little brother's Amiga, and there I actually wrote for my second year genetics project. I actually modelled, this is Delina canceritis. It's a type of social spider, a social huntsman spider. That's for all of the people who've come from overseas, expecting to see spiders in Australia. That's a social one. So they actually gang up, and I actually. And so there I modelled different chromosomal races. That's a hybrid zone that I did there. And I did it on my Amiga 500. And I did it, my little brother had actually written a Modular 2 compiler and linker for it. And so I actually used his software to do it. But now we can't do that anymore, right? So the world's changed, haven't we? You can't, people don't write their own compilers anymore, do they, right? So look, moving right along. So let's get faster. That's a Fujitsu M780, right? So the Fujitsu M780, that was when I worked at the ABS in 1990, right? So I was doing work there reconciling the economic, the labour force statistics, which is, they do a household survey, and the economic statistics. They ask businesses how many people do they employ, because the numbers are never the same, right? So how do you get to the bottom of that? How do you get to a better estimate, from doing that? Now I remember the M780. I remember I once sorted like 560,000 records over 28 variables in 19 seconds. And I was amazed by my ability to do that. And I was also, in there you actually analysed, to get any disk space, you actually had to say how many platters you wanted, how many cylinders you wanted, the full specification, and you'd actually say when it would expire, and if you didn't actually renew it, it would expire. All right, so it was all very, very particular. But again, moving along, that's Sun Enterprise E6000. Right, so that's looking at the National Land Use Map, which is still created today. Right, so that's blending AV8HRR data, actually going to MODIS data, 250 metre across all of Australia, looking at combining that with area-based ABS statistics, to do constrained allocations. Right, and again, the E6000, it had 2 gigabytes of RAM, it had 16 processors. It was bliss. Moving in, bioregional assessments. Now, lots of people here are involved in bioregional assessments. David Post led us with, in a distinguished way. Right. So, I call it out, Luke. I've got many friends here from that project. It was a huge project, like close to $50 million, I think. But again, I suppose the computing there, I suppose as I become more management, but I suppose computing itself was becoming more virtualised. Right. So it ceases to be little machines, the machines we're talking about, and the things we do there. Okay, but what am I getting? What's the constant across all of that? Well, the constant is change. All right, so in terms of AI and ML, right, the issue, it's not something that's going away. And I suppose sometimes people kind of go, well, what are they up to? Well, you can ignore it. You can keep doing your own thing. There's a whole range of things, but I don't think that's actually a winning hand. And for anyone in this audience, it's actually understanding, it's getting onto that forefront to understand it, but it's understanding in a way, not just trying to mimic it, right, but actually really trying to work out how to exploit it to have the impact that we need, that we're trying to do. So I suppose just looking at where I think the things that sort of knock your socks off, right, in terms of things in AI, because there's lots of things in AI that potentially don't knock your socks off, but I think the things that knock your sock off, well, I suppose Dan had much better pictures yesterday, because I think Dan was using OpenAI, whereas I couldn't work. I think they wanted money, or there was something that I didn't want from the image generator, so I just went to GenCraft was free, and so I asked this one here for I wanted something around synthetic data. So this is what it generated, but you can't actually even read the text. It's not quite right. But I suppose that's AI, right? So AI does all sorts of amazing things. What are the good things? What aren't the good things? So look, I'm not going to get into a big technical discussion of kind of deep learning, right? But I think deep learning's deep learning. I suppose both the hardware and the innovation in the ways to use that hardware and the evolution of that hardware is an incredible thing, right? It's incredible. It's in particular niches, but it's an incredible thing. If I think back to the first time I saw, say, neural nets. In the sort of the mid-1990s, people were saying, neural nets, you don't have to assume anything, they work like the brain, they're amazing, all right? So, we looked at them a bit and we went, but how do you work out how many nodes? And they don't seem any better than a nonlinear model, and often they don't work. And so we went, no, we shouldn't pay attention there. And again, support vector machines turned up, and everyone forgot neural nets, and then they sort of came back, and they were like a fringe thing. They were a fringe thing within the machine learning conferences, right? Because no one could make them work, no one could make deep ones work. But again, through tweaking, changing, fiddling, right? It's actually amazing. It's amazing how simple you can do incredibly powerful things, all right? And it is empirical, right? People try lots of things, right? It's not theory and solving things. It's just trying to do. Just trying to work out how to make these things work. So, look, I suppose there's just some examples here, and look, there's people in this room who are much more technically close to this. So I definitely defer to them. But just looking at just using deep generative models, so generalized adversarial networks, right? So looking at how you can look at generating data, which predicts the future, which you can't distinguish from the actual futures that occur, right? So looking at how you can go about that, and actually doing that in skillful ways, and so, those things are actually starting to come into your actual use, use in real world systems. So, there's all sorts of activities there. A key part of that is the spatiotemporal aspect of it, right? Well, it's data density. You still need lots and lots of data, but it's also the spatiotemporal part of it actually has, it has a natural structure, right? And again, AI, again, it's sort of sold. We sort of hear that AI is amazing and it works like the brain and it can do all these things. But it's unnaturally good at quite particular problems, right? So you've got to understand the quite particular problems. Another one here is I know there's a lot of talk now in weather forecasting around work NVIDIA's doing and around ForecastNet. So ForecastNet's claiming that they can actually, or they can beat numerical weather prediction or at least be as good at it. Right? I suppose they're targeting, how they can do, I suppose, short-term, that they can accelerate the short-term forecasts, and that lets them build more ensembles, it lets them deal with uncertainty more. So again, it's not fundamentally changing the physics in a way, right? So you've got to work out what's it good at, what's it not good at, but it's finding ways to actually emulate or characterise, modelled systems, and you see it through reanalysis and those sorts of things, and then actually let you then do projections, in orders of magnitude faster, which then opens up a range of new things you can do. And so again, that's the real deal, right? So in this place, it's using fewer neural operators. I know I was talking to, we had some postdocs here I was chatting to who have some interest in that. And again, it's really interesting to work out how they make it work. And there's sort of bits of it that they make work. They kind of go, well, it's not clear why you do that, but to make it work, you need to do that, right? So again, it's actually an empirical science. It's not a math science or a proving science, right? It's a doing science. The next one to have a quick chat about, just being careful around time, is the double descent phenomenon. So the double descent phenomenon. So I was raised, and I'm sure a lot of people here were raised on sort of the test and train paradigm, and a lot of machine learning, or machine learning, that's all they use, right? So, but that's the bias variance trade-off, right? So if you have a small, if you have a model with not many parameters, it's very biased but has low variance, right? Every time you fit, you kind of go to the same place, but you're always missing. Whereas as you get more parameters, you actually end up, in expectation, you end up making a good prediction, right? But it's actually got high variance, right? Because there's lots of noise, there's too much flexibility, in the line. But the rule around that was that double descent said it went down, and as you get the dotted line there is actually when you have when you've got as many parameters as you've got observations, it comes down and it goes up again, right? Because you've overfit, right? Now everyone will go overfitting, right? We've all heard that. Now, double descent's actually the phenomena, that people started discovering that if you actually went past that, and the way you go past that because the parameters are regularised, right? So the parameters aren't free, right? Because otherwise this makes no sense, right? The parameters are regularised, right, in terms of how they're constrained, right? But you can actually go past there and actually end up coming to a lower error rate, for your test set than you did, before that, right? So that's the double descent phenomena. Now that knocked my socks off. Right, because we haven't got told about that. Now again, that's being unpacked at the moment. It doesn't always work. It's actually connected back to ridge regression. So again, it'll fit back into the theory. But again, it's actually something all our intuitions aren't actually matched up with that. So the last one, look, and it's probably the biggest one, but it's probably the hardest one to speak about, is around the whole transformer models. Right, so transformer models are sort of the basis of GPT. So transformer models, it's a new neural network. It's using a thing called an attention mechanism, which lets it be more flexible about the bits it pays attention to and the bits it doesn't pay attention to. But it's actually driving some of the discussion around from a language model, which is just it's basically just like a hidden Markov model. It's a complicated hidden Markov model. But from a model that just predicts sequences of tokens, can intelligence come from that? If we just learn enough things people have written and we learn off a big enough corpus, can intelligence come? And that's a big knock your socks off sort of question. There's a paper there, the 2023 one, just around sparks of artificial and general intelligence. If you read that, it has things like asking GPT-4, draw a unicorn, using R, right? And it'll draw a unicorn plotting through R, right? And it'll do a range of things. Now, again, even though that's only months old, there's actually papers now that are actually disputing it, right? There's disputing certain things. If you use certain metrics, because people are seeing emergent behaviour, you get enough data, you can suddenly do things you couldn't do before. But people are saying that's just how you framed that. Right, and so that's again a thing that has to be talked about. But I think for the science one, is to just get your head around, how, through GPT, has it learnt arithmetic, right? So if you show enough sums to a language model, can it actually learn arithmetic, right? Because it's got to, and it's got to have a neural net that has the right structure to actually learn it. But if you think about learning it, break it into tokens, right? It really has to, just understand combinations of things, and it has to understand how positions interact, and the attention mechanism lets it do that. And then it's got to understand carrying, right? It's got to find a way of actually reaching that. Yeah, and so, so a language model perhaps has learnt arithmetic. Again, that's disputed. But the bigger thing which sits under that is where people start talking around foundational models. And that's going to be the big discussion in science, for the next, for the coming period, is around, it's the paradigm that if you show something enough data, so if I show enough regression examples to a design neural net or transformer, can I actually learn regression just by showing it regression examples? If I show enough spatiotemporal data to a neural net, if I show every bit of spatiotemporal data that we have in the world, to a neural net, can I actually learn it, right? So I can actually, instead of programming, I program regression by saying, please fit Y given X, it's actually, here's a neural net that actually knows. I can say, I want to predict this from this, and it has worked out how to do all the rest of it, right? And that's the transformer piece. So I think if people want to get really to the forefront of that, or just where some of the thinking is, that's a report that's just come out just in May this year, right? So that's from the national labs in the US, and that's actually talking around wanting to build big foundational models, right? So it wants to push this in all sorts of strategic areas, some through the nuclear industry, through national defence, right? It's a confronting report in the sense that it sort of calls out explicitly, wanting to the strategic imperatives around China and the EU, and actually I can't remember is it EU, but it calls out other countries, in terms of how they need to stay at the forefront in terms of where they're investing. But it also, I suppose, it paints a vision for where I suppose the well-resourced end of some of this is going to, and I think this community in Australia needs to work out how we fit into that. So look, I think most of that's actually kind of. I think it's more there is a new prophet in town, and we probably need to sit at the prophet's knee, and listen a little bit and work out which prayers work, in this world. But I suppose I quickly want to go on to some of the other challenges around AI, and I think it's particular challenges for for places that some of us work in, right? So back to some of the Terminator bit. I suppose there is a challenge around. There's currently an appropriation of science, right? So again, anything to involve with data is almost being called AI, and there must be people in this room who've dressed up something they're doing as ML or AI. Whether you're looking for funding or looking to get it published or looking to do things. And so it's getting all mixed up, right? Because anyone can declare this is AI, so therefore it must be good, right? And the more science gets appropriated, that here's this amazing thing. I think the picture on the left there is a good colleague of mine I worked with for a long time, Jess Ford, an outstanding scientist, has done a lot of work around fishing, foreign fishing and working with our neighbours. But again, she won a Win in AI award, and congratulations, to her. It's well deserved. But nothing she was doing was to do with AI, right? It was just very, very traditional work that we've done, right? So now you're getting events which are sponsored by tech companies, which then claim 30 things that were amazing things AI did, but most of them are things that happened before the tech companies. They're not created by those people. Look, the end of theory. I'm sure people have seen this is a very famous Wired article around that theory is obsolete, just get enough data, we can do things. Now that's before Transformers. It's actually thinking a different thing, right? But again, that meme keeps coming, right? That actually you don't need theory, you don't need expertise, you don't need anything. That if you just get enough data and the machine will optimise. And I don't think that's true. I think look, I won't do on this because I know the time's getting shorter. But this is just again the sort of paper you get now, and you're seeing them in all areas, right? Where you're getting showing the rise of machine learning, right? And again, I suppose it shows this exponential thing here, but like, again, as a scientist, that's totally confounded that everyone writes AI in what they're doing now because they'll get it published, right? So actually what's going on is actually quite complex. If you actually look at this, Nate Silver's a statistician. This is Jerome Friedman, right? Was a common visitor to Australia. I knew him a lot back in the day. Trevor Hastie, marked my PhD, and Rob Tibshirani. Like between the three of those people, they have over 1 million citations, right? So that's, these guys are heavy hitters, right? So three people with, I think, about 1.1 million citations, Google Scholar, that goes into that. But again, that was all, Leo Broman's actually a statistician as well. But that's all out of, that's actually framing it within the statistical paradigm, right, in terms of what machine learning is all about, which is actually being ignored in a lot of the work that's actually going on. Look, and I think, in the interest of time, I won't dwell on this, but there's actually a more general appropriation of language. What bias is actually different. AI talks about bias in a conceptual sense, often in a how would you say, it's sort of like a social justice sense, which is really important, right? I think we need to all think about, social justice and the impacts of all the things we do in society. But on the other hand, if we never define what it is, or we define it in convenient ways, then it actually just confuses what we're actually talking about, right? It actually makes our debates harder and it divides us. There's issues around what democratised is, right? So democratised, there's currently parts of AI that actually, think that if they could make it that everyone could run an AI, a river model, everyone could run, a hydrographic model, everyone could run, a groundwater model, that we'd actually have a better world. And so if we could do that, they could run it with a single line of code, that would be a nirvana of society. Whereas I just see, well, look, who am I to argue against democracy? But on the other hand, a world where everyone's having a bit of a go, we don't know who's right or who's wrong, and that's part of a bigger malaise that we see, in society at the moment, right? There's even, the appropriation of what data is, right? And that's actually something that we've got to look at. And so, and I'll skip through this quickly because this is a really dangerous slide for a modelling group, right? Because this is just, and that's why I've made the writing really small, so you can't actually pick on me. But I think if you look, statistical models, mechanistic models, and then qualitative models, right? And again, in the risk analysis community that I come from, that's a useful way of doing it, but there's lots of ways of cutting it. But the issue at the moment, right, in big parts of AI is actually viewing a lot of this as a programming problem, right? That if you actually do the programming, then you can actually, do it as programming. And actually foundational models come into it that if you just give it enough data, you give something enough data that it can, that it can work it out, right? We don't need those sorts of conceptualizations. So I just really want to touch, and I'll go through this quickly because I know I've only got 10 minutes left, but I suppose it's just a little case study just around the issue of synthetic data, right? So synthetic data, right, it's hot, right? Synthetic data, everyone loves synthetic data. There's startup companies generating synthetic data, right? There's papers in Nature saying synthetic data, real data, it's biased, it's too hard, let's have synthetic data. All right, so it's a big thing, but when I grew up, synthetic data, if you make up data, that's actually, if you think of McBride or think about some other people, who've been involved in synthetic data in the past, things can actually go wrong when you actually do that. There's actually papers out there, so this is just from last year in the Royal Society. So if you go looking for it, you can find discussions of synthetic data quite quickly, and I'm sure whether this talk is made available or how we are. If people want to get references, that's fine. All right, so why do we love synthetic data? We like it because some people say it's privacy preserving. Right, so I can have data about everyone in this room, but I can then actually I can do a GAN or do a statistical model. So let's jump on. Right, so you've got the real world, generate some data, but I can estimate a density. Whether I do it statistically, I can build models, or I use a GAN. I can then generate new data and I learn it, but I haven't actually shown any of your data. Now, if we unpack that, the first part is there's a hard bound on your ability to estimate densities, right? So the curse of dimensionality says you can't estimate densities in high dimensions, right? You get the curse of dimensionality, which is, as your data, as your dimension goes higher, your data becomes sparse, right? So you can't actually do it, right? There's actually mathematical proofs that say you can't do it in general. You might get lucky, right? But there's no general result that lets you do that. But on the other hand, there's people advocating that they can generate better data synthetically than real data. the privacy preserving one is interesting in the sense that the only reason people want to analyse that data is they want to learn something about you, all right? So I want to know, you know, who have we got? Chris Chilcott, right? So he lives in Darwin, you know, so what's his salary? Well, it's going to be between here and here. Okay, I'm going to send him ads for X or whatever, right? So that's why they want to do it. But again, privacy preserve, you know, it doesn't actually preserve privacy, right? So you can still do what's called attribute inference, you know, from data where you've built synthetic data, right? So you can still actually know something, and given the internet's full of your private data anyway, you can still match that on. Now, the only reason everyone doesn't go, why are we doing that? Is because somehow we've defined that releasing people's actual data is bad, but on the other hand, releasing their data where we've made it synthetic isn't bad, right? Whereas actually it leaks probably as much information, or it leaks significant amounts of information just in that way. So again, it's sold as being responsible, but it's not actually responsible. All right, the last one's around bias data. I won't do look at this, but I think this one here, it's actually, we've pulled out this line, right? So we've actually gone, real world data is all too hard and all too biased and all too wrong. Let's just specify the density according to the idealised world we want. Let's generate some new data and then let's learn from it. But again, look, this is actually quite curious, which is, if you actually know how you want the world, why do you even go through the data learn phase? Why don't you just impose those rules upon the world? All right, so it actually makes, and the reason is, if all you know how to do is run machine learning models, then you've kind of got to go through this to make a rule, right? So it's the way they generate rules. But again, it's not data, right? So what they've done here isn't data about the world. You've just made a rule to generate data and yeah, gone from there. Look, I'll touch on this really, really quickly, which is just, the second part's just around ethical AI, right? And again, ethical AI, there are thousands of papers in the, in the computer science literature around this. Most of them cite, the first one's the trolley problem, and the trolley problem is, trolley, which is, I think it's a tram's out of control, you can switch it to the left track or the right track, there's a grandmother and their baby who've lived a virtued life, and there's three criminals on the other track, which one do you run over? How do you work that out? All right, the next one is, the compass scoring system, which is actually, can you use analytics to actually look at, to show a judge what, for a judge to consider when they're actually looking to make a decision, right? So they look at recidivism rates and all of those sorts of things, right? And again, that's seen as unethical, but again, there's complexities in there. The last one's here is around Amazon, right? And they were doing hiring, all right? So Amazon, they obviously got, here's all the people we hired, here's their CVs, let's run some AI on that. And they turned out with a hiring algorithm which selected more men, all right? So it was sort of baked in, all right? But again, right, there's issues there around, well, what's causal, what's expertise, what does that mean in a scientific sense rather than a social justice sense? And again, but it's all mixed up in those discussions. So there's another paper here that's just come on. I wonder if people know some of these people, but it's actually coming here. So this is from, again, last year, just looking on, bringing those debates into the environmental sciences, right? So bringing issues around how we can make the work we do ethical, responsible and trustworthy. Now again, it says, they just say artificial intelligence, but they don't actually define what artificial intelligence is. And if the paper's predicated on just using data, and I see this in other places where people are now just saying that science isn't responsible, right? Because science hasn't taken on the right approaches to using data, right? And again, it's ignoring the peer review system, it's ignoring lots of systems. Look, just really, I won't dwell on this, but again, ways in which AI can go wrong. Like it calls out, non-representative training data. I would have thought people would know that pretty well already. I think training labels are biased or faulty. So the work of Ray Carroll, probably in the 70s, actually cleaned up most of that, at least in the statistical world. Data is affected by adversaries. Well, maybe that's new, right? So people are trying to manipulate what you're doing. But again, choices around model training. AI model used in inappropriate situations, right? Well, that takes expertise, all right? So again, there's a rediscovering of things that are known within a community, right? So I really like the talk by, was it Saman Pazavi? Was on yesterday morning, which I think really, is starting to touch on these issues around how the things need to work together. Look, I think just having a look on where this is going, and again, like I don't want to, I know it's a vexed question, another country in the politics of, Black Lives Matter and things, and obviously racism is a total scourge upon, the human endeavour. But I suppose the main claim in that paper, or the main example, the only empirical example they show, is actually show that the radar network is actually not centred on the Black Americans, and actually it's just the percent of Black Americans, so you actually can't even tell the absolute number. Right, so again, this is predicated on a view that radar networks should be put out not to answer, I suppose, a complex set of questions, but to actually just that everyone should get a piece of the action or whatever. Right now, again, it's important that we think through the implications of all the things we do, but that's not an example of bias. Whereas that's actually shown as AI bias that someone has that's actually happened. Yep. All right. We'll just mix those last two. So look, I'll just finish up here. So what do I think? Right now, to echo Michael Jordan. Now, does everyone know Michael Jordan? No, it's not Michael Jordan, the basketballer, right? So Michael Jordan, the computer scientist and the statistician, right? The AI revolution hasn't happened yet, and there's a good paper online if you want to, read that one. I do recommend that. Like if we want science-based responsible AI, right, expertise is actually key, right? There's got to be a conception of the world that we've got to embed it in. And that conception of the world can deal with machine learning, but it's got to deal with that. We've actually got to have control of our data, right? If the answer you get changes depending on the data that you have, you've got a problem, right, in the science world, right? And so we need to, the science of data hasn't changed, right? We've had 50, 60 years of getting pretty good at that. We need the cutting edge analytics, right? So when I talked about AI, that's the pieces we need. We need principled decision making, right? So we need to actually talk about the scientific ability to predict what the world is, and then, how do we base decisions around that, and who wears those costs, right? We can't just munge it all together into an AI world. We need robust engineering, right? To do this is actually hard, right? I know a lot of people. I know Swandas talked about some of that in terms of how we get better about that. And we need honest and humble community engagement, right? So it's not about hype. It's not about over-promising. It's actually talking about what the world actually needs. Now, the last bit there is foundational models. They are the wild card. I think it's an interesting prospect, but it's only a 9-month-old debate. So I don't know. I'll leave it to all of you to think where do you fit into that world, and what do you think you need to do? But we can't. None of you can turn your back. Well, we can't turn our back on it. So thank you.
I think I can use the roving mic down here. Look, Simon's done a great job of filling up the time to lunch. So those of you who want to be first in the queue, you can head off if you want to. But I'd like to give people the opportunity to offer a few questions up to Simon. So I've got one roving mic, and Keith Matthews is up the back there with us from Hunton Institute in Scotland. So have we got any questions from the back first, so Keith can run around? Besides people heading off to lunch? Come on, there must be some questions. That was a great talk. Thank you, Simon. Here's one. You can do that one, Keith.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I'm Mark Hegnaar from Deltaris. I like your comments and your thinking about the data and the synthetic data. And I think the data is of course key in AI ML field of work. So one question is, do you also agree that also collecting more field data is actually also required to make it a success, to grow AI and ML basically here in Australia, but globally? And the other question I have is around the synthetic data. How do you see about that the synthetic data is going to be used in AI and basically come in this loop of learning itself on its own generated data? What do you see as the risk there?
Yeah, like so on your first question, like I think that's actually a key thing, because like through the sweep of my career, I've gone from designing experiments where people were collecting data and helping them analyse it, to actually collecting data became too expensive and now we just download it, And actually this next step that we're just going to make it up because there's not enough stuff to download or we've downloaded it all. Whereas actually the key part of digital is actually the data, right? So when people talk about data as the new oil, like in a marketing sense, the fact that I know little bits of facts about you all and I can send ads to you, that's fine, but that's not science, right? To do science, I think it is around how we get the best of the things we can download, like remote sensing, those sorts of things, but then we actually need boots on the ground around data, and whether that's through sensorisation or through other processes, we've got to change some of that paradigm. I think the second one's key. You're starting to see papers already, because again, you're getting this, imagine a world where GPT-4 is generating screeds of information, and you're getting whole industries, generating, get well cards and, invitations to things or whatever. And then you start learning off that. It actually ends in very strange places, and quite a lot of AI. I know there's AI like in the, in HR, human resources, right? How you select people, but again, it's trying to analyse, what people's LinkedIn profiles look like. But as soon as people understand that's how the system's automated, they'll just change. There'll be a program which actually write it like this, and you'll get an interview. So that the whole thing that it will eat itself is actually really big in this, and that's why the synthetic data. Like I can't, it's not that you can use synthetic data in particular places for particular reasons in principal ways, but in a general sense, it's a line I won't cross. And I can't, when people go, I've made synthetic data, isn't it great? I go, well, that's not great, right?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Great talk. Sean Wilkinson from Newcastle in the UK. Just asking, what's your opinion of Italy's government banning ChatGPT, and how do you think this should be used, things like that, in undergraduate education?
Look, I suppose I've been a voice in a debate with lots of voices. Like, I think my view is actually, that you can't block it out in a sense. And like, I just think about for my children, and so, they're, because I'm old, they're 32. No, my children are younger. But like to some extent, it's actually better to actually put someone in front of ChatGPT and actually use it, but actually go, well, look at it, check that that's right? Because the biggest thing about using the internet is how wrong it is, right? And so how broken it is in lots of ways, right? So even think of Google. Google's very stupid in lots of ways, but our brains have tuned to it. And so to some extent, ChatGPT, as long as people, I think people, it's there to be understood, and it teaches you things. You've got to meld it, but you've got to understand it. I'm even seeing now, if people use ChatGPT, I've seen people caught out even within CSIRO where they've kind of used it, and they've used it in a lazy way, right? So they've gone, I want a definition of this, and then they've gone, here's this definition, and then the worst thing they did was I got that off ChatGPT, and everyone goes, oh, really? But it's at the end of the day, whatever it generates, you've got to stand behind it, and I think that's the issue. So I don't think banning it actually works, but I actually think regulating the whole, but I think there's things that can be done with ChatGPT, that need to be regulated, right? We spend $240 million a year on banking regulation. Well, why are we spending we're still even trying to scratch our heads about how we're going to regulate this, whereas I think that's important. And so back to your broader one around how it's used in education, I think it's got to be part of, it's a world they've got to navigate, but it's got to be, they've got to be taught how to navigate.
Well, listen, I reckon that the first lot of people have probably got through the lunch now, so it's probably, probably time to draw this to a close. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Simon. Yeah.